Here to explain how marketing opens the door, closing seals the deal, is David Martin, President with the Marquee Group. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and quite frankly, we have a fantastic topic. It's called Marketing Opens the Door, Closing Seals the Deal. As most of you know, marketing is how we make our customers aware of our products and our services. Marketing is how we engage with customers. Marketing is what gives us the opportunity to do business. Closing is what makes us successful. Now, one thing we know for sure, if you have a customer, you will have resistance. You will have pushback. The only question is how much, in what form, and when. Now, many of us in the audience have read articles about objections, and some of them have these catchy names like objections are your friends, or maybe you should welcome objections. Really? Try convincing your salespeople that they should welcome objections. But the fact of the matter is, if your salespeople cannot successfully handle objections, that is simply a weakness that you can't afford these days, because today's marketplace will not tolerate that kind of weakness. It's just too competitive. Just too competitive. Now, in my opinion, one of the best ways that we can deal with objections is to try to minimize them, or in some cases, even eliminate them before they even come up. So let's start off by talking about 6 ways that we can possibly do that. The first one is what we call the 100-100-100 rule. It's very simple. It's to offer 100% of your customers 100% of what you have to offer that is relevant to them 100% of the time. In other words, cover every base. Leave no stone unturned. Look, your salespeople must fully carry out your sales process. And I mean your sales process. Different dealerships can be successful using different sales processes. We all know that. But it's important they carry out yours because yours exists for a reason. If your salespeople water down your sales process, if they take shortcuts rather than minimizing objections, in effect, they will invite them, they will create them, and obviously you do not want that to happen. I could kind of sum all this up with the sales philosophy that my father gave me when I graduated from college and he knew I was going into sales. He said, David, in sales, if it can't hurt and it could help, it should always be done. Now, at age 22, I'm not sure I really understood that, but I certainly do. More than anything, I understand it now. If a salesperson could do something that wasn't going to hurt him or her, but could possibly even marginally help, why wouldn't they? So number 1 is the 100-100-100 rule. Number 2, build extreme value. Now listen, everyone knows that your salespeople should build value, but the key word here is extreme. And I strongly suspect that everybody in the audience knows the 3 things that salespeople should build value in. It's themselves, it's the product, and of course your dealership. I know you know that. The key is, do your salespeople, and more importantly, do they act accordingly with every customer, every time, no exceptions? You see, in the absence of sufficient value being built, then the default issue for the customer will always be money. It will always be price, because they have nothing else upon which to base their decisions. You know, many years ago, a very famous sales trainer named Jackie B. Cooper said, the easiest way for a salesperson to reduce price is to increase value. And that is just as relevant today as it was then. Number 3, ask questions to uncover hidden objections. Here's what I mean. You can ask a question fairly early in the conversation, maybe while you're doing your interviewing, your counseling, your qualifying. A question sort of like, Jim, let me ask you something. Does anyone else need to hear this information? If he goes, well, ultimately my wife's going to have to hear it. Bingo, you just uncovered an objection that would have reared its head in about an hour, hour and a half. But by uncovering it now, perhaps there are some things that can be done to make the sales process go more smoothly. Perhaps you could find out where the wife was and take the car so that she can see it. Perhaps you could invite her to come in for an appointment later on. You all know these things. But the important thing is, by uncovering it now, you can minimally reduce the severity of the objection. Or it could be a question that you might ask later on. Let's say your salesperson has gone all the way through the sales process and is in the process of writing them up so they can come to the sales desk to get the initial proposal. Right before they get up and to leave, why not say something like this? Linda, other than, of course, money, is there any other reason you can think of that we could not do business? You see, it's going to come down to money eventually, but to say, other than, of course, money, is there any other reason we couldn't do business, can uncover the hidden objections. Because she's either going to say, oh, no, it's all about the money now, or she might say, hold on now, I never buy on the first day. Hold on, I never buy from the first dealership. Hold on, I thought you knew I was 6 months away from buying, or whatever it may be. Once again, by uncovering this information, your salesperson can bring it to the sales desk, and both the salesperson and the sales manager can perhaps put together a more effective sales strategy and thereby minimize the severity of the objection. Number 4, share expectations with the customer. In other words, what can they expect from you? This is very important. And the reason is that customers have a natural tendency to get a little upset, a little antsy, a little nervous, a little apprehensive when they're in an unknown situation. And when that happens, they're probably going to be second-guessing everything that your salesperson says and maybe even looking for negatives. And if they look for negatives in a car deal, will they find them? Probably so. But if they know what to expect from you, they tend to relax. They tend to go with the flow. And they tend to enjoy the experience more. I tell you who is really fantastic at this. It's Disney. Has anyone ever been to Disneyland or Disney World? Okay. Well, you know then, if you're standing in front of one of the rides, let's say Space Mountain, and you're trying to decide whether to go in. If you all of a sudden say, yep, let's go see what this is about, you'll start walking and walking and walking and walking until you finally run into what? Yeah, the line. From that point forward, you're not walking anymore, you're inching, you're shuffling, you're inching. And if you didn't know what to expect, you would start at some point thinking, well, how long is this going to be? Is this going to be 5 minutes? Is it going to be 5 hours? I mean, how long is this going to be? Then you start thinking, gosh, I can't waste my entire day here. Oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, we spent over $100 for these tickets. And you see what I'm talking about? Because you didn't know what to expect, you have a tendency to get nervous, apprehensive, and maybe even upset. Disney knows this. They are brilliant marketers. So what they do in front of every single ride is they put the wait time. So if you walk up to Space Mountain and it says 60 minutes, you know what it's going to take. You can either decide I'm going to do it or not. But if you decide to do it, you're walking in eyes wide open. Therefore, you won't be apprehensive. What you'll probably do is you go, okay, we should be in there at 5 minutes till 2. And then you relax. Because when you get to the line, you're not just, oh, what's happening? You know what's happening, and you know what to expect. So now you just talk with your friends and your family. You take a look at what Disney has put to distract you in the first place. The key is you knew what to expect, so you relax, and you will simply enjoy the experience more. Now, let me share with you how we can help you in terms of, in the dealership environment, sharing the expectations. What if I could give you a word track that your salespeople could use that would not only share with the customer what they can expect from you, but just as importantly, what if you could get the customer to agree to go through your sales process all the way through to a write-up and agree to it in advance? Would that have value? Well, sure it would. So here's how it might work. Let's say the customer has never been to your store before, and all of a sudden your salesperson says, Jim, I should have asked you this before. Are you familiar with our shopping process here at the dealership? Well, no, David, I'm not. Oh, I think you're going to like this because all of our customers seem to. What we'll do, with your permission, of course, is I'm going to ask you a few questions to make sure that I know what you need and want in a vehicle. Obviously, that's important. Then I'm going to share one or more that I just know you're going to love. Our model lineup is as good as it's ever been. Then we'll take one of them on a short test drive because there are some things I can only share with you while we're on a test drive. And then when we come back, we'll take a look at some investment options. And while we're at it, we'll answer any other questions that you might come up with. Things like monthly payments, down payments, interest rates, heck, even the value of your car. How's that sound? And I see most of you are nodding your heads because you know how good that sounds to the customer. And if they say, yeah, that sounds fine, that sounds great, what have they just agreed to do? Sure, go all the way through your sales process, including a write-up. And I know you would agree with me that no write-up usually means no sale. And also, increased write-ups means increased sales. That's a great way to share expectations and get them to agree to go all the way through your sales process and do it in advance. Okay? Number 4, let's follow the theory of contrast. Now, I know that sounds fancy, but it's not. What it simply means is this. It's contrasting two scenarios to make the one that you want the customer choose seem more desirable. Let me give you an example. Here's a personal situation that happened to me that should hammer home the point. I came home from a business meeting. I'd been doing some training out of the country, and I met my wife at the front door. She's all excited, and one of the reasons is she said she had bought a new shower curtain for one of our bathrooms. Well, I'm sure my excitement level didn't meet hers because, quite frankly, I didn't know we needed a new shower curtain. But anyway, so she goes and she shows it to me, and sure enough, it is beautiful, I must admit. Now, you probably don't know this, but I am basically cheap. So I'm looking at a beautiful shower curtain, and I just casually said, well, dear, how much was it? And she said, that's the best part. It was only $250. My mouth dropped open, and I'm desperately trying to think how to say, you've got to be out of your mind, when she starts laughing and she says, I'm just kidding, cheapskate. It was only $150. And I went, thank goodness, I truly thought you had lost it. It was only later that I thought, $150 for a shower curtain? But that's the theory of contrast. Compared to $250, it was brilliant. Couldn't even tell you if she did it on purpose, but it worked. Now, I said that it's a fancy sounding thing, theory of contrast, but the fact of the matter is you all do this anyway. You do it every single day. It's your was-is pricing. Your was-is pricing. In other words, the MSRP on this vehicle was, but your special pricing today, Mr. Customer, is. You see, the reason we do that is we're trying to give the customer a rationale, a justification for saying yes, because they can see themselves as an intelligent shopper if they're able to save money because something was one price and now they're buying it for a much lower one. You all do that. But I would bet that most of you do not use the theory of contrast on down payments or monthly payments or incentives. In other words, anything with money involved that you could share with the customer. This is what it was or would have been, but this is what it is, and it's more desirable. They will always choose the one that you want them to. Here's how else you can use that. How many of you sell used cars? Almost everyone? Okay. Well, a lot of used car customers do not know what that used vehicle originally sold for, but that could be important to provide a contrast. Let me give an example. Let's say you had a young couple who just had their second or third child, whatever, and they know they need more room in a vehicle. They figure they can't afford a new SUV, but they're going to go out and look for a pre-owned one. So they come to your lot, and let's say there's a 2-year-old Chevy Tahoe LTZ sitting there. I have no idea what you'd ask for. Let's just say $37,500. Now, the customer who doesn't know what it originally sold for might look at the $37,500 and be thinking, wow, that is a lot of money for a pre-owned car. But what if your salesperson knew the original price and said, Mr. Customer, I don't know if you realize this, but this beautiful Tahoe originally sold for over $55,000. And what you got was amazing. You got this, and you got that, and you got this, and you got that. So I'm sure you can see, Mr. Customer, that in this pristine condition and still having 9 months and 8,000 miles of factory warranty left, it represents a fantastic buy at only $37,500. You see, now the customer has a contrast and a justification for feeling like an intelligent shopper. That's the theory of contrast. And then 6, always work with repeat and referrals as much as humanly possible. I think we would all agree that when someone already knows you, likes you, and trusts you, they're going to tend to beat you up on price a lot less. They will tend to trust you more. They won't question your intentions or your motives. Therefore, they will buy more easily, and they will object far less frequently. All right, there are 6 ways to minimize them. What if you can't minimize the objections? Well, then it becomes very important that you learn how to deal with them. So let's talk about 9 ways that you can perhaps do that. The first one is to be prepared, the old Boy Scout motto. Now, I know that sounds basic, but here's what I mean in terms of objections. I do a lot of traveling around the world, and I often ask salespeople, how many objections do you think you've heard in your selling career? The answer usually ranges from dozens to hundreds. But the fact of the matter is there's basically 6. That's it. 6 primary objections. Your price is too high. That's not enough for my trade. I've got a better deal somewhere else. I still have some shopping and or research to do. I need to speak to my spouse, or I want to think about it. Once you've handled those 6, you've about handled 95% of all the objections that you'll ever hear. So when I say be prepared, what I mean is simply this. If there's only 6 to prepare for, it simply makes no sense whatsoever for every one of your salespeople not to be prepared to professionally respond to only 6 objections. Number 2. Let's watch for and listen for buying signals. All too often, salespeople will talk themselves into a sale and then unfortunately right back out of a sale. Why? Because they don't stop talking. Let me give you an example. Let's say that your salesperson is doing a walk-around presentation and they're delivering all this product information because it's swirling around in their head, and they're trying, of course, to impress the customer. We all would understand that. But at some point, the customer stops and goes, David, let me ask you something. Does this one come in silver? The unprepared salesperson would probably answer and then keep on talking because they still had more information to dump. But the prepared salesperson would go, yes, it does. I assume you'd prefer it in silver? Customer goes, well, yeah, I think I would. Silver, that is gorgeous. Whoosh, we're off to the close now. You've got to watch for and listen for buying signals. Number 3, have perseverance. Hang in there. Don't give up, whatever you want to say. Study after study continues to show that the average customer does not close on the first or even second attempts to close. The average customer closes on attempts 3 through 6. So obviously, if you have a salesperson who's throwing in the towel after just 1 or 2, it's not going to work. You do the math. And by the way, when I say attempts to close, I don't mean the exact same thing. I don't mean, do you want to buy, 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 do you want to buy? No, you have to mix it up, but you have to be ready to attempt to close at least 6 times with the average customer. If you do that, you'll be more successful. Number 4, stress your value proposition, your unique value proposition. In other words, what do you bring to the table? What do you offer that perhaps your competitors do not? Now, at our company, what we feel every salesperson should have is simply a document that probably says something like why it makes good business sense to do business at the name of your dealership. And it should include things like we're a family-owned dealership. We've been in the same location for 30 or 40 years. We have long employee tenure. We have heavy involvement in our community. We have award-winning service departments. We have shuttle services, loaner cars. We have early bird drop-off, late-night drop-off, free car washes, free nitrogen for tires, whatever applies. But you put all this on a sheet of paper and make sure that every salesperson has a sufficient number of copies. And here's how they can use them. If they have to get up to leave the customer for any reason to go to the sales desk, let's just say, rather than just leaving the customer on their own, why not leave them with this document that shows all the value-added reasons they should be doing business at your dealership? Because in today's market, you and I both know what often happens when they come back from the sales desk. Their customer is on their smartphones firing away, and you better hope they're looking for who friended them on Facebook and not shopping your competition's inventory. But if they're focused on something of value to them and from your dealership, they're more likely to stay focused on what you want them to. Now, the second way that your salesperson can use this is this. If the customer leaves without buying, and unfortunately they often do, then rather than just taking your salesperson's business card with them, why not take the business card, staple it to one of these sheets of paper? Now the customer is leaving with the contact information, but also all the reasons why they shouldn't have left in the first place. That's a great way to use your value proposition. After all, people can buy cars anywhere. Why should they buy from you? Number 5, let's diplomatically deny the objection. Look, the fact of the matter is that customers often say things that are untrue. It does not mean they're lying. They're just factually untrue. And it's okay if you point it out as long as you do so diplomatically. Obviously, you won't get anywhere by saying, no, you're wrong. Okay? Many years ago, Dale Carnegie came up with a solution for this that became known as the feel, felt, found close. I see some of you nodding your head, so you're familiar with it. It basically went like this. I understand how you feel. Others have felt the same way. What they have found is. Now, fundamentally, I don't have any problem with it. But as a practical matter, I do. And here's why. There have literally been millions of people who have trained on the Dale Carnegie course, who in turn have trained other millions of people. So a lot of people have heard the feel, felt, found close. I would be afraid that your salesperson would be legitimately trying to point out why factually what they said was incorrect to help them out. But once the customer hears the alliteration of feel, felt, and found, rather than thinking of the logic of what's being said, all they can think of is sales ploy, manipulation. I'm not falling for that. So why not just leave the words out? Why not change the words? For instance, couldn't you say, well, I can appreciate where you're coming from. Others have initially said the same thing, but fortunately what they've discovered is, isn't that the same thing? That's how I would do it. But we can definitely diplomatically deny the objection. Number 6, your salespeople must absolutely be sold on your products. If you want more money for your vehicles, and who doesn't, then your salespeople must be absolutely sold on their superiority so they can justify more money. And the funny thing is, it doesn't really matter whether your products are worth more than somebody else's or not. But what is important is that your salespeople believe that to be true. If it's true for them, it can become true for the customer. Did you know that a lie detector cannot tell the difference between a lie and the truth as long as the individual believes the lie to be true? So you see, your salesperson must truly believe in the superiority of your products so that the customer can in turn believe the same thing too. Be absolutely sold. That's the way to get a higher price. Number 7, initially agree with customers. Now, with objections, that might sound counterintuitive, but it's not. You should always agree with customers first to relax them. Look, we all are instinctively drawn to others who say and do things that we're in agreement with. It's human nature. But this doesn't mean for you just to agree with everything and then do nothing. Nope. All agreeing does is sets the stage for you to ultimately get your way. Let me give you an example. Let's say your salesperson presents a proposal to the customer and the customer goes, no, I'm not paying that much. I agree, Jim. At first glance, it might seem a bit high, but you knew you were buying a luxury vehicle, and you always pay a little more for quality, don't you? If you would please, okay the proposal right here, and we'll have you out enjoying your car in no time. But agree first to relax them and draw them into you. Number 8, price is not the reason. Folks, rarely is price a valid reason for somebody not to buy. Don't believe me? Well, how many times do you think that this has happened? The customer told you that your car was too expensive. Then they went right down the street and they bought a more expensive car at another dealership. You thought they were saying they couldn't afford it. What they were saying is it was too much for that car, which means it's just a question of what? Yeah, value. Value is more important than price. Always has been. I suspect it always will be. For all intents and purposes, there are no price objections. There are simply questions of value. And then last, but certainly not least, is to use what we call persuasive psychology. Dr. Ellen Langer is a world-renowned professor of psychology at Harvard University. And when I say world-renowned, she's one of the best in the entire world on the study of human behavior. In one of her most famous studies, which became called the campus copy machine study, she had her research assistants wait until somebody was actually making copies at a copy machine and had them interrupt them. Now, in phase 1, they interrupted and said, may I use a copy machine because I'm in a big hurry. 95% of the people let them do it. In phase 2, they interrupted and said, may I use a copy machine? With no reason given, only 60% said okay. That's a big drop from 95% to 60%. And the only difference was no reason given. In phase 3, they waited, they interrupted, and they said, may I use a copy machine? Because I have to make some copies. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry, okay? May I make some copies? I know you're making copies, but I got to make copies. It makes no sense. And yet 89% of the people said okay. Dr. Langer's takeaway was a very simple one. If you want to get somebody to do what you want them to do, simply give them a reason. And based on that study, doesn't even have to be a very good one. Now, there was a second takeaway, and that is the use of the word because. You might have noticed on both of the reasons I gave you, it was because whatever. Dr. Langer said the word because is so ingrained in us as human beings that it is highly influential. Let me ask you a question. Anybody in here have children? Anybody have children? Okay. What one-word question does every 3-year-old incessantly ask their parents? Why? Why, Mommy? Why, Daddy? Why? A parent very often tries to patiently and diligently answer, but finally in frustration when the kid won't stop saying why, they answer with a one-word answer. Because. Usually followed by, I said so, but still it starts with because. And because of that, the word because is so ingrained in us that even as adults, when we hear it, whatever follows is an acceptable reason. Now, I've done this, since I heard about this study, I've tried it out. I've done it on grandchildren and children, and I even told my wife I was doing it to her, and she said it was okay. And employees and customers, it works. So your salespeople shouldn't simply be asking for the business. They should ask for the business because, in my opinion, Mr. Customer, this vehicle is a perfect fit for you. Remember the word because. It will help you over and over and over. All right. Now let's talk about the responses that we need to give to the objections that we hear on a routine basis in dealerships all around the world. Now, when we talk about responses, obviously we're also talking about word tracks. Now, word tracks are invaluable, and the reason why is because, number one, they give salespeople a track to run on. No pun intended. More importantly, they allow the salesperson to thoughtfully and professionally respond to the objection rather than giving one of those jump in the head, jump out the mouth with no filter, knee-jerk reactions that gets them in trouble every single time. Now, for a word track to be effective, it needs to have good voice inflection. Your body language needs to be calm. It needs to be relaxed so that your customer can be calm and relaxed. Your customers take their cues from you. Have you ever noticed that? Absolutely. They take their cues from you. And the reason why word tracks and closing techniques are sometimes effective is they introduce what scientists call a psychological tendency. Now, the reason it works is this. That tendency can increase the customer's desire to buy, but only if it is seen as non-manipulative. That's the reason why word tracks must sound comfortable, must sound natural coming from your salesperson. The moment they sound stilted or awkward, you're toast. All right, now let's talk about the actual responses we can use for some of the objections we hear every day. And let's start with your price is too high. Now, unfortunately, in today's market, even now, too many salespeople say things like, well, what would you pay? Now, I'm sure most of you, I see some of you are grimacing. We don't want them to say that, because if they say, well, what were you thinking, or what would you pay, then obviously you're kind of history, because you just might as well have given the negotiations over to the customer, because you won't like what they say. Now, at the Marquee Group, we love to follow a philosophy that we call always use your numbers, not theirs, not the customer's. And the reason why is odds are you won't like theirs very much. Now, because your price is too high is a money objection, we like to use a three-step negotiating process with all money objections. The first step is to build or reinforce the credibility of your numbers. The second step is to get the very best possible counteroffer you can before going back to the sales desk for the second time. That's important because we all know that every time a salesperson leaves the customer and goes to the sales desk, they are losing ground. But if you work harder to get the best possible counteroffer you can before going back to the sales desk, you will likely cut out one or more of those money-losing trips to the desk. And then number three is to get an offer and to cast doubt. Let me give an example of how this might work. Let's say that your selling price is $34,000. Your customer might have come in hoping that they could buy that car for, let's say, $31,000. But you make your presentation of $34,000, and the customer looks at it and says, I'm not paying that. The unprepared salesperson might have said, what would you pay? And obviously the customer would have responded, $31,000. But I'm going to go to step number one and build credibility. Customer says, I'm not paying that. I would go, gosh, that's a little surprising to hear, Jim, because quite frankly, we never miss a proposal by much. Okay, well, if we're going to give management an offer, let's at least make it one they might be able to consider. What realistic figure did you have in mind? More like 33.7, 33.8, something more like that? Now, at this point, because I've reinforced the credibility of my numbers, not once, by the way, but 4 times. Did you notice that? Gosh, that's a little surprising to hear. We never miss a proposal by much. If we're going to give management an offer, let's at least make it one they might be able to consider. What realistic figure did you have in mind? More like using my numbers? Reinforce it 4 times. Once that happens, now the customer might feel a little uncomfortable giving you such a low figure, so they hit the reset button. They go, well, no, I mean, I was thinking more like 32,000. Okay, now it's time for number 2. Get the best possible counteroffer you can. I'd probably go 32,000. Wow, that could be tough. Why don't we do this, just in respect of your time, because obviously I know your time is valuable. Why don't we hit them at, let's say, 33.5 and see how close they can come? That'd work for you, wouldn't it? All they can say is yes, no, or maybe. It probably wouldn't be a flat yes, probably wouldn't be a flat no. Most of the time, it's some variation of maybe. That's what negotiation is all about. So maybe he goes, well, maybe I could go 32.5. I'm still trying to get the best counter offer I can, believe it or not, for both of our sakes, for the customers and mine, because they want to buy the vehicle, but we've got to do it on a basis that's good for all. So I'd probably say, gosh, 32.5, that too could be tough. How about this? Just in the spirit of compromise, why don't we split the difference and say 33.1 and see how close they can come? That'd work for you, right? Yes, no, or maybe. That's all there is. Now, once you have convinced yourself you've got the best counteroffer that you can, now it's time to go to step number 3, and that's to take the offer and cast some doubt. Here's how I would probably do that. Before I got up to leave, I'd probably say, Jim, I assure you I'm going to do my very best to help you on this, but I'd really ask a favor of you. Just please promise me that if I cannot get this handled, that you won't hold it against me personally, okay? Wish me luck. And then, frankly, you'd be amazed how many people say, good luck. And why not? They want the car. It's their numbers. Of course they'd wish you luck. That's the 3-step negotiating process. All right, here's another one. That's not enough for my trade. We hear that one all the time because, hey, the fact of the matter is customers almost always feel like their car is worth more than we do as a practical business matter. Now, unfortunately, we still hear too often from salespeople, what do you think's fair? Or something like that. That to me is a big mistake. And the reason why is this. If you ask the customer what they think is fair, even though that may sound well-intentioned, if they give you a number, now their ego is involved. Because by definition, if that number was fair, what is any other number? Unfair. Now, psychologically, how many customers are going to accept an unfair price for their car? They'll just shut down on you. You're not doing them any good or us any good. Now, this is not enough for my trade. It's just nothing more than another money objection. So, frankly, you could use the same 3-step negotiating process that we talked about a minute ago with changing out one word. You say, gosh, that's a little surprising to hear because we never miss an appraisal by much rather than proposal. Other than that, it's just fill in the blank. It's exactly the same. Now, there's lots of other ways that you can do this. For instance, you might simply say, well, Jim, remember, we're taking you out of a 6-year-old vehicle and we're putting you in a brand new one. New factory warranty, new styling, all new safety features, all new technology. Why not put the car shopping experience behind you and start enjoying your new car today? What do you say? Or you might say, Linda, I know your car means an awful lot to you, but please understand it is 5 years old. It's got 102,000 miles. It needs a safety inspection, a complete detailing, some minor reconditioning. All those things cost money. If it wasn't for that, I'm sure we could pay you a little bit more. Or you might say, John, listen, please understand, my owner won't allow us just to rinse off this car and put it out front for resale. It's going to have to go through a complete safety inspection, complete detailing, and any reconditioning or repairs that need to be done have got to be done first. All those things cost money. Those are the things we have to factor in. I'm sure you can appreciate that. Now, before I leave the idea of that's not enough for my trade, let's be candid about something. Many times in today's market, the reason they say that's not enough is they owe more than the car's worth. Happens all the time, doesn't it? Well, it's okay to point that out to them. Just make sure you do it gently and diplomatically. Nobody wants to be clubbed over the head that they owe more than the car's worth. Okay, let's say your car's worth, or the car's worth $11,000, but they owe $13,000. I would simply say something like this. I'd say, John, listen, I can appreciate where you're coming from, but unfortunately, the value of your car has no relationship to how much you owe. I mean, for instance, if you only owed $9,000, would it be worth only $9,000? No, it'd still be worth $11,000, right? Most people will understand that. All right. Sometimes the customers simply won't accept what we ask them or what we offer for a trade, and so their response to us is, well, I'll just sell it myself. Now, please try to avoid the temptation of saying, well, you don't want to do that, because that kind of implies that they're foolish if they do. But the fact is, we don't want them selling it themselves, because if they do, then there's no way we can transact a car deal today, because time lag kills deals. What I would do is I would start off by softening it when they said I'll sell it myself by saying, well, I can appreciate where you're coming from. It's certainly an important decision. And actually others have initially said much the same thing. But fortunately what they've discovered is it's not nearly as quick or easy to sell a car in today's market as it used to be. May I share with you why? And trust me, they will all say, well, sure. Now, at our company, we think that every salesperson should be equipped with a document that says basically the challenges with selling privately. Now, there's one in your handouts, and so you're welcome to use it. Be sure and download the handouts when you go home for all of these word tracks, but you're welcome to use it. Let me show you what it might look like. I would turn the form around to the customer and say, John, for instance, it's time consuming. It takes time to place ads, to answer phone calls, to meet with customers, and to show the vehicle. It can be inconvenient. Sometimes, the customers want to see the car on their time frame, not yours. You can always have broken appointments. Sometimes you may rearrange your busy schedule, then the customer doesn't show up, nor calls you. Welcome to the car business. It can be dangerous. You have to ask yourself, in this day and time, does it make sense for you to expose your property and your family to people that you don't know? It can also be costly. Advertising doesn't always work, but it always costs money. And there may be some things that you have to do to your car to get it ready for sale. And those are the things you have to ask yourself, are you prepared for that? Your inability to provide financing may hamper your sales efforts. Your inability to take a trade might even get rid of the only customer you have for your car, but minimally it will slow the process down. Another thing is that cars go down in value on a continuous basis. Rarely will a car be worth more in the future than it is today. You also have an exposure to lawsuits. In today's market, in this society, anybody can sue anything for anything. No matter what. So your buyer's perception of undisclosed property damage or undisclosed mechanical problems might land you in court. And then finally, there is a loss of tax savings, at least in our state. Have I shared with you how that works? And then, of course, you all know how that works. Now, I've used this form many, many times myself. And quite frankly, rarely do I ever get to the bottom before somebody says, okay, David, okay, I get it. But can't you give me a little more money for my car? And then we're right back into negotiations where we wanted to be. All right, here's another one. I need to talk to my spouse. Now, this one is a good excuse, and we hear it quite often. But to me, it's a questionable objection. I think very often it's just a nice way of saying no and then cutting off the conversation. But I think that this is very important. Almost always, when somebody says, I need to talk to my spouse, they know there's a problem, and they even know what the problem is. They've just decided not to share it with you yet. So I think we need to minimally discover the real story behind the statement, I need to talk to my spouse. I'm basing it on this, is that I'm married myself, and I know it would be rare for me to ever try to buy something that costs tens of thousands of dollars without at least informing my wife that I was considering it. I see a lot of heads being nodded, so you know what I'm talking about. Here's how I might handle that. Let's say I'm talking to a man, and we go through the process. We've negotiated, and we've done everything. And then finally his comment to me is, well, David, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think what I need to do now is to go home and talk this over with my wife. Now, what I would probably say at that point is I'd probably say, well, I can appreciate what you're saying, Jim. I'm married myself, and this certainly is an important decision. Before you leave, may I ask you a question? Sure. What do you think the two of you would do if she says no? Now, the average customer would say, well, if she says no, I guess we wouldn't be buying it, or minimally would have to talk about it some more. Okay. Do you think she'd be saying no to the car itself or to the money aspect? Because that's basically all it could be. And so no matter which one he chooses, you would then simply say, oh, really? Why do you say that? You see, because once you've uncovered that it was either something to do with the money, maybe it didn't look like the equation they had come up with themselves during breakfast. Maybe you're $70 a month too high. Well, if that's the case, his objection was that I need to talk to my spouse objection. It was we're $70 too high objection. But if you can uncover that, then perhaps you can do something about it. Or perhaps you may find out that the vehicle just really didn't perform the way they hoped it would, didn't have the equipment that they hoped it would, etc. But finding out which one it is at least gives you the shot at being able to overcome that objection. Does that make sense? Good. All right. Here's another one. I can get a better deal somewhere else. Now, please resist the temptation to say how much better or what do we have to beat, because that reduces everything to money rather than value. Now, what I think we need to do with this one is, number one, is we need to confirm the validity of the objection. See, sometimes customers say this and they don't have a valid objection to, not really. What they have is they're trying to bluff you into getting a lower price, or maybe they're just mistaken over advertising. But if you become convinced that it is a valid objection, then what we need to do is this. We need to get on a level playing field with the other dealership as quickly as possible to avoid giving up needlessly additional gross profit. One way to do that is to simply say something like, well, Jim, let me ask you something. If all things were equal, where would you really rather buy your next vehicle? Now, obviously, you have to live with the answer, no matter what it is. But I'm proud to say that over 80% of the time, the customer will probably say, well, all things being equal, I'd rather buy from you. At that point, you say, great, love to hear that. Do you mind if I ask why? Now the customer starts saying things like, well, you've been very generous with your time. You've been a very nice individual. Your dealership has a great reputation. I've got a buddy of mine who does business with you. I understand your service department is great. While they're saying these things, what in effect are they doing for themselves? Yes, they're selling themselves, aren't they? And that's very important because sometimes customers will try to tear down the value that you build for them, but they will never try to tear down the value they build for themselves. Now, at this point, if they've agreed, all things being equal, they'd rather buy from you, the worst that you have to do in terms of pricing is to match someone else's. Most of the time you can do that. But interestingly, once they've built additional value in their mind as to why it's better to buy from you, you can often sell the vehicle for even more than they could have bought it from someone else. All right? Here's another one. What's your best price? We hear it all the time, don't we? You know, funny, that's not really an objection, is it? No, not really. It's just a question. But ask any salesperson. It sounds like an objection, and it feels like one. But what we have to do with this one is we have to be able to acknowledge the question and then try to move the customer back to the value of the vehicle or to their own particular needs and wants and away from price. And we must do it without seeming evasive. That's the key. Now, there's lots of ways you could do that. I'll give you a few just to see if any of them ring true to you. The first one is you might say, well, Jim, I'll be more than happy to get you a great price before you leave. But out of curiosity, why were you drawn to this particular car in the first place? In other words, what made it the one for you? Or you might say, well, Lisa, listen, I know price is important, and we'll get right back to it. But other than price, what's most important to you in this purchase? Once again, acknowledge it and move back to the vehicle. Or you might say, well, John, I'm glad you asked. Actually, my main role here at the dealership is to help you find a car that you're just going to be delighted with. It's actually management's function to make it affordable. Please allow me to preview the car with you first to make sure that it has everything you need and want. Otherwise, the money part will be kind of irrelevant. Wouldn't you agree? Now, sometimes we're dealing with cars that have been aggressively priced on the internet. How many of you are aggressively pricing your cars on the internet today? Yeah, almost all of you now. We all have to do that because we want our cars to come up on page one to put some eyeballs on them. But it introduces a different wrinkle here. Wouldn't you agree? If you aggressively price your car on the internet, then you've cut out a lot of the gross profit up front. So when the customer still says, what's the best price on this one, you don't have much to work with. So I might respond slightly differently. Here's how I might respond. I might say, well, Jim, actually, this has been made so easy for the consumer. Our management team has posted highly competitive prices online rather than artificially inflating the price, hoping to win some kind of negotiating contest. In fact, I suspect that's probably the reason why you showed up today. But I do want to be clear. Once you and I have verified that this is the vehicle for you, I will check to see if there's an additional flexibility because occasionally things can change. You see, the reason why that response is effective is that it takes away any illusions of additional large discounts the customer may be hoping for, but without flatly stating that the price is firm. Now, before we leave this best price, there is one other way that people use best price, and that is when you're showing a proposal, the customer looks at the number and he just kind of goes, well, now, is that your best price? Now, that's a simple yes or no question, isn't it? And the funny thing is, both answers get you in a world of trouble. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm presenting a proposal to somebody and I go over it, and then the customer goes, well, now, David, is that your best price? If I think, well, I don't want to lose him, and so I go, well, no, it's not necessarily my best price. Well, what do you think he's going to say? Sure, well, then go get it, you idiot. Stop wasting my time. Same thing. I could show the proposal, and the customer goes, now, is that your best price? If I decided to try to stand firm, I might go, well, yes, it is. Well, if he stands up and says, well, it's not good enough, what do I do then? Ha ha, I was just kidding? I mean, you get yourself in trouble both ways. So I'm going to highly recommend you don't say yes or no. When somebody says, is that your best price? Just put a pleasant look on your face and say, it's an extremely competitive one, sir. Are you going to be putting this in just your name, or will somebody else be on the paperwork? In other words, I'm not going to answer yes or no. I'm going to give them the chance to say yes. And surprisingly, an awful lot of people will go, okay, well, I was just checking. Because they don't know what else to say. They don't negotiate for cars but every 3 to 6 years. You do it every day. You have the advantage. We've got to stop giving it up. But that's how I would handle that. All right, here's another objection. Nope, I don't want to put any money down. Now, I'm not suggesting that we won't do a deal with no money down. I'm simply suggesting we would prefer having money down because it's actually in everybody's best interest. It really is. Now, what we probably want to do is make sure that every one of our salespeople are able to reinforce the customer's advantage for putting money down. After all, we all make decisions based on what's in it for me. Why should I spend my money for a particular reason? Well, we have to be able to share with the customer. They have lower payments. They have less interest paid. They get into an equity position on their vehicle sooner. They get better terms from the lenders. You know all these things. But we have to make sure that your salesperson is conversant in this and ready to share those advantages. Now, sometimes what we need to do is to use third-party influences to see if it might affect the customer. You can say something like, well, Jim, I hear what you're saying, but lending institutions still like to see about 20% down. Now, in this particular car, that'd be about $5,800. Or would you like to put down more to hold your payments even lower? And minimally, what we want to do is we want to see if we can get the customer to pay their own taxes and fees. That's actually a pretty easy thing. You can simply say, Mr. Smith, lending institutions at least like to see you pay your own taxes and fees. And besides, I'm sure you don't want to pay interest on that as well, do you? A surprising number of people will say, well, I mean, how much are we talking about? And when you tell them, they literally will say, okay, I'll do that, but I'm not putting any money down. Go figure. But it doesn't make any difference as long as they're stroking a check. And then finally, that brings us to our last objection, and that is the catch-all, I want to think about it. Now, I want to think about it is an interesting one because I suspect that everybody in this room has used that to get out of making a decision at some point in their life, and so do your customers. What I'm basically saying is it's not a real objection. Now, when you hear I want to think about it, please, please, please do not say, what do you want to think about? Because some customers hear that as a challenge. You might not have meant it as such, but they hear it like, well, what do you want to think about? If they hear it like that, you're in big trouble, okay? What we want to do is this. Assuming that I want to think about it is actually masking the real objection, then what we want to do is to uncover it. As I said before, the only objection you can't overcome is the one that you don't know about. Now, there are many ways. I could probably give you 5 or 6 ways to uncover this, to handle this particular objection. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to give you 2. The first is what we call the summary close. Now, I learned it as a young salesperson as the 4 P's close. The 4 P's stand for product, place, person, and price. My buddy Tom Stuker calls it the is it close. And the way I learned it was this. The customer says, well, I want to think about it. You say, well, I can appreciate that. It's certainly an important decision. Before you leave, may I ask you something? Is it the vehicle or its equipment that you're uncomfortable with? Well, no. I like the car. Oh, okay. Is it our dealership? Has somebody offended you in some way? No, everybody's been nice as they could be. Oh, is it me? Have I done something? Oh, no, you've been a prince. And then the way I learned it was to say, well, then is it the price? Well, my buddy Tom says, David, don't do that. You just spent 30 minutes to an hour trying to convince them it was a good price. And now you're going to let them off the hook by saying, is it the price? Even if it wasn't, they'll all jump on that and say, yeah, it's the price. Because they know you're just giving them carte blanche to do that. He said, tweak it a little bit. You simply say, well, Jim, I know it's not the price. So what is it? Now, that's an interesting spin, isn't it? And even if they come back and say, well, no, actually, it is the price, try one more time. Said, no, Jim, I've sold dozens of these cars. I just know it's not the price. Please share with me what it is. It's an interesting take on it. Now, at our company, the Marquis Group, our favorite way to handle this is what we call the 1 to 10 close. This is, I can't take credit for much, but I actually created this objection handling technique about 23 years ago, and I've used it thousands of times, and so have thousands of salespeople all over. The way it works is simply this. The customer says, I want to think about it. you soften things by saying, well, I can appreciate that. It's an important decision. Before you leave, you always say before you leave because then they think, I'm out of here, so they relax. You say, before you leave, may I ask you a question? Sure. Well, on a scale of, I don't know, 1 to 10, let's say, with 10 meaning you're about to drive this car home today and 1 meaning you wouldn't take it even if it were free, where do you stand right now? And then no matter what the customer says, you say, great. What would it take to get you to a 10? Now, if they can answer that question, what information will they have just given you? Sure, how to sell them a car. But you know what? You couldn't, not in a million years, you couldn't have said, how do I sell you a car after they said, I want to go and think about it. Because they say, you can. I'm going home to think about it. But somehow not focusing on that aspect. When you say, what would it take to get you to a 10, they focus on actually the base reason behind their objection in the first place. Now, we've used this, for, as I said, many years, thousands of times. It's very effective. Not on everybody, of course, but very effective. And it's usually for 2 reasons. Number one, it serves a double function. When you ask on a scale of 1 to 10, where do they stand, their answer gives you a very clear indication of just how interested they are. But the real key is when you say, what would it take to get you to a 10? If they do answer the question, then you at least minimally know what you need to do. It doesn't mean you can do it. There are plenty of objections you absolutely cannot overcome, but you at least know what it would take, and that has great value. Now, this will probably come as very little surprise to you, but what it takes to get people to a 10 is usually money. It's usually to discount your car more or to put more in their trade or they want a lower down payment or they want a lower monthly payment, whatever it may be. It's usually money. But we, over the years, have heard some really funny things. We've had people who have said, oh, no, what I want is bed liners for my truck, or I want running boards, or I want tinted windows, or I want free maintenance for 2 years, or I want a 6-disc CD changer instead of a single CD. We've heard all kinds of stuff. But recently, somebody told me about something that happened in which a customer who was asked on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you stand? He answered 9.9. Now, I got to tell you, folks, I've never even heard of 9.9. I created this thing. So you knew you were pretty close. When the salesperson says, great, what would it take to get you to a 10? The gentleman said, you're going to think I'm silly. And the salesperson says, try me. And the guy said, well, I want a second owner's manual. And when he told me this, I said, he wanted a what? He said, that's what I thought. And so he said, do you mind if I ask why? And the gentleman said, well, I just got to thinking about it. What if I lost the first one? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, that'll never happen again, and you're right. But the point is, it wouldn't have happened the first time had you not known how, or this gentleman not known how to overcome the objection. That's the key. Just remember, the only objection you cannot overcome is the one you don't know about. Well, folks, that about does it for me. I want you to remember this. There are 3 basic components to overcoming objections. The first one is to minimize or eliminate them before they even come up, if at all possible. The second one is to understand and to use the keys to handling almost all objections. And the third is to know the actual words to use for proper responses, professional responses. Now, almost all these word tracks and more are in your handouts. So I highly recommend that when you go back to your dealerships, you have them printed out, you share them with your salespeople. You never know which one-on-ones may hit a home run for you. I appreciate it very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much.